Hey guys, welcome to the I Give Life to Life podcast with Coach Nrgy, the single parent's life coach. This is the channel where I will share valuable content on all matters of the heart and various life issues that single dads and single moms face. And periodically, I will have special guests to join me. And this week, we do have a very special guest of mine. This is my little sister. She is the owner of Sin's Play Place and the wife to an amazing man, and if I may add, an amazing new mother. I am going to let her introduce herself right now.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's so exciting to do this. And I really appreciate the opportunity to tell my story and to join you on this amazing platform.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being willing to add your own information, your own experiences to just this channel and to the topic that we're going to talk about today. And so what I'm going to do, I know that what prompted you to reach out to me to be a guest is a post that I made on my website maybe a few days ago, no more than about a week ago. And I'm just going to read that just for everyone's point of, so they'll know exactly what we're referencing. And that post was something that Bill O'Reilly had said. He stated, single parent situations drive poverty and often lead to unsupervised kids. Many boys growing up without fathers often feel angry and abandoned. Thus, they seek comfort in all the wrong places. So I, of course, put my comments in the captions as far as how I felt about that comment or how I felt about that particular quote. And you responded back and you were like, you know what, let's talk about the daughters. And this right here, right now, we are giving you the opportunity to tell your story. So tell me this, what is it that quote that I wrote, when you read it, what did it do to you? What did it say to you?
It spoke to me on such a personal level because I come from a single parent household. It was just myself and my mom for a long time until I was 7 years old, and then my little brother came around. So, that quote it fit exactly who I have grown to be today. And it just brought back so many flashbacks just from my upbringing that I felt like, we hear so much about the boy side, but we rarely really go into the daughter side. So that's really what it did for me. And I just felt moved to be one in a few to actually open up and express how I felt about it from a more personal level.
Perfect. And that's, we're going to segue right into you. Go ahead and tell us, what did it do to you? What is it that you want us to know from a daughter's perspective? So take it away.
Well, from a daughter's perspective, like I said, I grew up from a single parent household, just my mom and I. When I was 7 years old, my little brother came into the story. And it was one of those things where my younger brother, he had his dad, but I didn't have mine. So I felt the effects of a mom who was more so sheltering her daughter, being, very overprotective. And let me just say this. I love my mom. I have a lot of love for my mom. There's a lot of room for improvement. But overall, that does not take away from the love. This is just my perspective as a child. Growing up, I was very sheltered. It was a lot of things that I could not do, from hanging out or having friends over. It just seemed like the world was such a huge place that, letting go of my mom's hand was more detrimental than it was building me up. I see now the difference, the way that she's raising my younger brother. He has a lot more freedom. He's able to, have friends, go out, hang out, be gone all hours of the night. But for me, it was more so, I couldn't do that. I'm constantly reminded of the dangers of little girls. I'm constantly reminded of all the predators and constantly, it felt like being pressured to almost be perfect in a way. Mom, just you cannot let your mom down. You can't do certain things, or you can't say certain things, especially when it came to my feelings about certain things. I don't think I got an opinion until I was around 16 or 17. And even with that, it was more so of, well, don't do this because, you don't want people looking at you a certain way. And we're from a more cultural background. My parents are from Africa. I was born in France. So I came to the US when I was 6.5, 7 years old. So it was a huge, huge shift for me. And of course, for my mom. I don't think that it was understood that, we're not in a country where you have to be scared to express yourself, or you can be scared to vocalize certain opinions. So all of these things played a factor in my upbringing, just being scared to let my mom down, being scared to have my own train of thought, or just being scared to have an opinion about certain things because I didn't want to let her down, or that's not what she was used to when she grew up. And that caused, honestly, a lot of distance between my mom and I. Just putting my heart on the sleeve, that caused so much distance from when I was in middle school through graduating high school and even throughout college. It just kind of drove a huge wedge because I never knew how to open up to my mom about certain things that mattered to me. I never knew how to really sit down and have a conversation with her, even about boys. Daughters expect to be able to sit down and talk to their fathers about that. I didn't have that. So the only other person I had was really my mom. But even with that, there was no room for boys growing up. There were no rooms for hanging out, on my own with my other girlfriends. And it was constantly afraid of what we're getting into and what we're doing. And, I hope you're not growing too fast, or I hope, it was just so much there that I felt like I couldn't do. And the older I became, it was like if I wasn't speaking to her about my books or school or a satisfactory career, it almost felt like it didn't matter. And again, this is just my personal perspective as a daughter. It's not words that came out of my mom's mouth at all. It's just my perspective. It was very difficult to build that relationship with my mom, and I see a completely different mom watching her raise my brother, who's now 16. It's like, wow, I wish I could have, that's all I asked for. I wish I had friends over till 1 or 2 a.m. or I wish I could be going out of the house till 1 or 2 a.m. or driving when I'm 16, but it just wasn't like that. And just going back to the quote and its relevance, I feel like, again, we spend so much time talking about how boys have to be raised up as men, or the importance of having their fathers around. But what about the daughters? They're kind of left to think for themselves, or really think about what their mom's personal or background was with men and go off of that, but they don't really have an outlet. You see a lot of moms who even, and I hate to say this, but are jealous of their daughters because they're not doing, certain things. And it's like, well, they're wanting to kind of step out of what they came to know as the norm, and they're wanting to find their own way. So a single parent household, although it's unfortunate, and I really wish that it could be different for a lot of households, is detrimental for not only boys, but also equivalent for girls.
That is so right. It's crazy that you're saying that. And I say crazy just because, you and I, we did not talk ahead of time about what you were going to say or anything like that. And today's date, as far as when this is being recorded, it follows a couple days after this exact conversation that I had with my mom, and where it was her first time hearing from me everything that you just expressed. The disconnect, the overprotection, the difference in how the treatment with me as being the girl versus my brothers being boys. And she never heard my perspective on it. And it's just, I'm over here just like flabbergasted because you're saying everything that I mentioned, from the sheltering to, the fact that it put distance between you and your mother, and it did the exact same thing with me and my mom. And it's crazy that it has, that it tends to be that way.
Right.
And you're right. It's often talked about and discussed when it comes to boys, being in single parent households. I guess just more so because they do more outward actions.
Right.
They get out of the house and they may be the ones to get into trouble. They may be the ones to go hang around the wrong friends or whatever.
Absolutely.
But then with the daughters, we're typically just sheltered and in the house, and like you don't hear from us, you don't see us, because we're stuck
Right.
in the home. And anytime that we go anywhere, we have to be with our mom,
Right.
or with whatever parent that is around. And I was over here just like shaking my head. It's just crazy of how we both, and I'm sure other females, other women can, and other daughters can relate as well to exactly what you're saying, and to what I'm adding to this particular conversation. And so it's unfortunate that the guys, they don't feel what it could look like as though love, they don't feel
Right.
loved. I'll
Right.
say it that way. They don't feel loved. And so you're a parent now,
Right.
and you have a son, but you are not a single parent. So that's also already an awesome start to your son's his upbringing.
Hmm.
But I do want to know, like, with what you've experienced, with how you're seeing your brother being raised and treated from your mom, and then with your experience being a daughter, and then what you now know, because typically they say when you know better, you do better.
Right.
What is it that you're doing now or will do differently as a parent with your son?
For sure. And you're absolutely right when it comes to knowing better and doing better, because I have said this so many times, even to um, high school or middle school children that I work with. Your parent always, part of me has always believed that your parent has your best interest at heart. It may not always sound right, or you may not always understand. And I sound like my mom now, but that's the truth. They do have, a part of them has your best interest. Um, Looking back, there were a lot of things that I look now and I'm like, man, I'm glad that she and I had that back and forth, or that we were able to sit down and her explain to me where she was coming from, because that was a bad situation, or that was a bad decision. So I totally get that. And the difference that I plan on doing with my child, um, is that I want him to understand that from a mom's perspective, I don't expect him to be perfect. He will grow up, he will make mistakes. I just want my child to be able to come and talk to me if he can't talk to his dad,
Mm,
whether together or not. I want him to be able to trust that his parents have his best interest. If it is something that I don't understand, I've had a lot of figures like you, Nrgy, and other extended moms or aunts that I call them, I've been able to talk to when I haven't been able to talk to my mom. But I want him to have that. I want him to know that it's okay that he and I have different perspectives and he and I have different opinions. That's not going to make me angry. It's not going to make me love him any less. He is an individual, and he has a relationship that he will have with a higher power, and only that power can judge. But I never want him to feel disappointed, simply because he and I are on different pages about, life.
absolutely. And that's awesome. And so, okay, going back to your experience as a daughter, being
Mhm.
raised by a single parent, what would you say, if you can narrow it down to either the top one thing or maybe the top two or three things that, as a daughter, what do you see and what did you yourself also go through based on being in a single parent household? What are some of those stigmas or some of those stereotypical things, or those things that are frowned upon? And I'm going to ask that same question in a positive sense. So give me what the negative, the things that would not be considered, the good things. And then we're going to also answer that same question, in a positive aspect.
That's a good question. Oh, wow. As far as negative stigmas go, I mean, there was so much, you couldn't, just going back to my mom and myself, for example, I couldn't be out whatever times of night. Definitely around the 16, 17, when everyone else was driving, I didn't get that luxury. um, Being able to, I guess, I'm not even sure, honestly, how to answer that question, because for a long time, I just felt that it was a negative stigma being a part of a single parent household.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that was just the nail on the head, and there were so many that came, so much that came with that. But to me, that just did it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, and just speaking from, again, my perspective here, um, my younger brother's dad being in the picture, that was a negative stigma for me. And I say that because he had his dad, and for a long time, I think it took me until I turned about 21 to kind of get over it. um, I figured, well, he has his dad. Why does his dad want him, but my dad doesn't want me?
Mm-hmm.
But then, there was so much on the back end as well that I didn't understand. The last time I spoke with my dad was when I was 16 years old. Um, and so there was so much between my biological father and my mom that they couldn't get right, that affected me. Um, that, it just, honestly, that it's making me a little emotional, honestly. But I mean, that right there just was enough for me. That was enough to say, well, I'm already in a part of the statistics. We can't get any worse than that.
Right. And so let me ask this question. Do you think that, because I know a lot of times growing up in situations like this,
Mm-hmm.
the child will rebel.
Yes,
Did you feel, or did you actually go through any rebellious periods?
I did. Absolutely. I wouldn't be honest if I didn't say I didn't. I definitely did. A lot of times I felt like my mom was just wanting me to stay away from certain people or certain crowds, even some of her family friends, just because, I could be myself with them. And I hate to equivalent me being myself with rebellion. But it wasn't necessarily me, robbing and killing people or having sex. It was just simply stepping out of the household and putting myself out there to talk to more people and express how I felt about my personal life so that someone else can understand. That was also a form of rebellion, in my household. Um,
Right.
I stayed, I joined after school extracurricular activities just so that I would have, time out of the home. Honestly, I hung out with the good crowd and also the bad crowd because I was trying to find myself. So that was also a form of rebellion. Um, and even when we would go to church, I mean, I would try to keep myself so busy as an adolescent, just so that I could almost break free out of that, be quiet and don't tell anyone what goes on in our household mindset. That, again, in all sorts of forms, those were forms of rebellion.
Right. Oh my gosh. I laughed because you just mentioned something else that I also did. And I'm sure, other people in our same situations, did the same thing, which is finding whatever you can to be involved in order to
Hmm.
just get that freedom, in order to just
Right.
get that moment of being able to be out of the house, being able to be away from the situation, that you were living in, which,
Right.
at our age at that time, definitely seemed and felt unfair, especially if you had a sibling that you were seeing being treated differently just
Right.
because they were a different gender.
Right. Of
And so
course.
I did the same thing. Like I found jobs that I could work as early as I could. I, got into just about every sport that I could. I volunteered wherever I could.
Hmm.
And I mean, it was just a way to be busy. And then, like, you talked about, well, I'll say this for myself. Another thing with that I did, I wasn't able, my parents were super strict. So I grew up in a single parent household for a few years. My parents, they were married, they divorced, but then they got back
Hmm.
together a little while later. So I've experienced both sides. And so, with that being said, my parents were strict on me being the only daughter. I have two brothers and I'm
Right.
in the middle. So, I mean, the worst of the worst, right?
Right.
So with that, I said, okay, the only way that I'll be able to get out of the house or, be able to go do anything and hang out with anyone, is if I'm hanging with my brothers. And so that literally was why I grew up as a tomboy. I grew up as a tomboy in order to be able to hang out with my bros, to be able to hang out with my cousins, to be able to hang out with, okay, y'all don't want me to hang out with guys that I find interest in. Cool. I will hang out with the guys that are just my friends.
Right.
And so I played sports growing up. I was out there learning how to change oil, how to change the tire in the car from my dad. And, because that was just, if that's all that I could get in order to be able to, just have some type of life outside of schoolwork and housework, then so be it. And I literally grew up as a tomboy for that reason. I mean, I love sports, even to this day, I love sports. I even coach park ball. So, I don't regret that part or anything like that. But it is just so funny that you mentioned, just finding activities just to stay active in order to have a reason, an excuse that your parents would be, would be willing to accept in order to allow you some space away from them, which is the same space that they were giving to your other sibling, which is just, it's so interesting to me. So with that, what would you say? So being rebellious, that's one of the things that I would say would be on the negative side. The distance, of course, between the child and the parent, that's something that comes from the negative side. So what do you think would be positive outcomes from growing up in a single parent household, especially, from the daughter's perspective?
Definitely understanding a woman's strength. I don't think that you will find that or be able to learn that from anybody else. But your mom, watching your mother, whether it be a positive or a negative upbringing, you have to, as a daughter, you have to find it somewhere in your heart to understand that, like I said before, everything that your mom has done or has said, there is some interest for your well-being in that. If I hadn't gone through a single parent household, I would have never known, the definitions of a strong woman. That's from taking care of a household with children on her own, understanding that every day has to be, a hustle. You can't just sit back and expect someone to do it for you. So that is the number one accomplishment, is just knowing how to be a strong woman. And being vocal, that's another thing that was positive with me. It took me till about 21 where I really was able to look at myself in the mirror and say, I have a voice and it is okay for me to not agree with everyone. I dealt with depression for a long time. I really did. A lot of people that, I've had very close and dear to heart, they did not know that because I was not vocal. I didn't know how to talk. But it took me up until that point to say, I do have a voice and I do matter. My past or my upbringing does not define who I am entirely. It defines a part of who I am. But this next part of life where I figure out who I want to be and where I want to go, it includes my voice.
Absolutely.
And that's the positive of it all.
Absolutely. And I'm going to add something else that just popped up when you were saying that it's okay to have your own voice. And the thing is, one thing that I do want to make sure that people understand, especially those who may not, aren't able to relate to being a daughter to a single parent. One of the reasons of why you and I, like, our stories are so similar, although we've had totally different, we grew up in different locations, areas, time, oh my gosh, I can't think of the word that I want to use. But anyway, our upbringing was different, but yet so similar. And it's because despite the fact that we were under such lock and key, we didn't rebel. Typically, the daughters don't rebel as fast or, to the extent of the guys, of the sons.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, we still just want to make sure that our mom or our dad knows that we love them and that we respect them. And so, we'll lose our identity in order to make sure that we are respectful to our parent. We'll
Right.
lose who we are, we'll lose our voice. We, just like you said, we won't stand up for ourselves, even in a respectful way. We won't speak up for ourselves or even just voice our opinion or even ask the question because we are so afraid that it will be looked upon as if we're being disrespectful or, God forbid, trying to talk back to our parent.
Absolutely.
And, so all of that comes from the fact that, hey, at the end of the day, we do love our parent and we don't want to, do anything to hurt them and we don't want to do anything to disrespect them. But
Hmm.
it's just so crazy of how holding, as the daughters, how holding all of that in and basically living for our parent instead of, living for ourselves and growing into who we are or who we're going to be, how it affects us in so many ways to where, just like you said, it could cause depressive feelings and
Right.
thoughts because
Right.
of just the way that we were raised. And again, it could definitely be a cultural thing because, some cultures, the kids are able to just really openly express themselves. They can say
Absolutely.
whatever they want to say, when they want to say it, and how they want to say it. But in our culture, typically, it's, you got to keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, and don't even
Hmm.
don't even have a smirk on your face.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to get smacked.
Right.
And it does more harm than good.
Hmm.
And I'm just grateful that people like ourselves were strong enough to grow out of it in a healthy way and to use what we went through to turn it around and to use it to in a more beneficial way now as adults.
Right.
So that's yeah, that was something that I thought of when you mentioned, not having a voice. So the one of the last things that I want to ask you is, based off of how you were raised and everything that you went through, and also being able to see the difference between your treatment versus your brother's treatment, what's the most important thing that you learned from your experience?
To not be selective. Um, I can't say that I'll have another child anytime soon, but if I were to have, if my next child was to be a daughter, definitely not be selective. Look at both of my kids as equal
Mm-hmm.
in gender. Um, my son doesn't get to do things that my daughter can, and vice versa. I mean, except for the obvious things. But as far as how I treat them, how I listen to them, how I discipline them, that shouldn't change because they're seeing that. My son's gonna grow up and see the way that I'm treated and the way that I treat his father, and the way that I treat other kids. But what's going to matter the most is how I will treat his siblings, and his siblings will look at how I treat him. So that, not being selective and just being open, being a parent that's not afraid to apologize when I have wronged my child. Um, I think for a while, we tend to have grown up and we were right, but mom, I wasn't outside, I was in the house. That wasn't me, little things like that. And, your parent comes home and they're frustrated. So they tend to take their frustrations out on you, or, they're too quick um, to discipline and not really listen, things like that. They stick with me growing up and now having a child, just being able to listen to my child before jumping to conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
They grow up and they really, tend to hold on to certain things. There are things that I remember when I was 5 that, if I were to open up, my mom would say, "Oh my God, how did you know that?" And it's very small things that kids hold on to, and the older they become, they expect you as a parent to change certain things. But if you're not really paying attention to what your child has to say, or you're not open to what your child has to say, then they're going to bottle that up. And like I said, it took me a while before I figured it was time to empty my bottle before it just burst. Honestly, so that those are important for me.
Absolutely. And that's something that I can say for myself as well. And to add to what you were saying, although or despite everything that we've gone through, as daughters, we can turn that around and use what we went through and use what we learned to make us better, to make us a more well-rounded parent. Now, I'm definitely not saying that our parents were not good parents. Of course they were.
Absolutely
Love
right.
them 100% wholeheartedly. Nothing bad to say, nothing negative to say. But, with every generation, of course you want improvement. And I can
Right.
say that as long as children who grow up in single parent households, as long as we don't allow our quote unquote, lack
Right.
of a dual parent house, if we don't let if we don't let it destroy us, if we don't let it stop us, if we don't let it to break us down and tear us down,
Hmm.
we can use that to be better. We can
Right.
use that to be more well rounded, especially if we decide to have kids of our own. We can then improve or have better communication skills and styles. We
Absolutely.
can, learn to not just speak, but also listen to our children, because children, they have voices and they're not dumb.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
just because they are quote unquote the child, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have a voice, as long as they're being respectful. But then that's why and where you, as the parent, teach them respect and how to
Right.
talk to an adult, the proper ways to do it, when not to do it. And
Sure.
also, it will, based off of our experience of, coming up in a single parent household, it will allow us to show love, because
Right.
our parents and their generation, a lot of times they did not grow up and then did not display love to us as openly as the generations after them.
Sure. Right.
So we would be able to, we'll get comfortable and make sure that we show love to our children, because that's something that we did not get, or we didn't
Absolutely.
get it in the way that we, that you see it as being the norm. Of
Right.
course, they showed their love by making sure we had a roof over our heads, clothes on our backs, food in our stomach.
Of course.
But there's a little bit more that children need, period,
Hmm.
when it comes to love. And the
Hmm.
last thing that we will learn and that we can take into our adulthood and us being parents is patience.
Yes. Yes.
Just improving and just showing and displaying patience to our children. And all of those things come out of the experiences that we had, which were not the best or not the most, happy times of our lives. But if we just stick with it, and if we just, turn it to where it we can use it for the positive, use it for something good instead of something bad, then we are now that next generation that's more well-rounded and
Hmm.
hitting, checking off more of those items off of that list. So,
Yes.
and that's going to be another one of my next video, actually, on my YouTube channel. I'm going to talk about, the benefits of being a single parent. I'm going to
Hmm.
come from that perspective. And with, the notes that I was taking, just based off of everything that, just comparing it to what I've gone through just myself as being a single parent. Oh, it's so much good that comes from it, as
Mm.
long as we don't allow it to tear us down.
Right.
We definitely do have to find strength from somewhere, because it can get hard. It
Right.
can get depressing. Like you said, it can get really tough whenever, you just want to do the most basic thing. You
Hmm.
have your grades are where they need to be. You're very respectful. You clean your room, you clean the house, you help out your grandparents or your aunties or whatever. And then you just sometimes want that moment to just be a
Right.
kid,
Right.
and you can't get that. And so, yeah, that's going to be another topic. So, the last thing I want to say with this particular, while we're still on this topic, is there anything else? What's one last thing that you would like to share on today's topic, if anything?
Man, whether male or female, young lady, young man, um, our parents, and I love that you said that they're not perfect. They have done their best, the best that they could, the best that they knew how. I can guarantee they probably had their stories about their parents. They can only do so much, but we're not always going to see eye to eye. I can be 100% thorough with you. To this day, today, I don't really speak to my mom. We don't communicate. And a lot of people will say, "Oh my gosh, put it aside. Life is short." Um, and that's true, but your peace of mind, um, at one point in your adulthood, you have to understand is important and will come first. Um, I'm a big believer in Christ. I believe that, in the end, He will fix all things that are broken, that needs to be mended. But you cannot and you do not have to try to hold on to something that you don't understand. As long as you do your part and you try and you have prayed about it, it will fall into place. They're not perfect. We as kids, we haven't been perfect. But for sure, if it comes to that point where you have tried and you have tried and it just doesn't seem like it's getting right, understand that your peace of mind matters. You've done nothing wrong. Pray about it, and in due time, it will work out.
Absolutely. Their peace is priceless. And, one thing that I say to a lot of my clients is, if you can say that you've given it your best effort, to try to reconcile a particular relationship, and if the other person is not reciprocating it, then you can now go to bed with peace in your heart and peace in your spirit, and know that, hey, I at least tried, and whenever that person is ready, you will be ready to, hear them out. You will be ready to, receive them and accept them. So you are so right. My goodness, man, this was an awesome, awesome topic, an awesome conversation. I am so happy that you showed interest in that post that I made. It definitely piqued your interest, and a few other people that also commented later on. And, with that, I want to give you the floor. I want to give you some time to just, talk about what it is that you have going on. Again, I know that you are a business owner. You have many great things going. So go ahead and shout out your business and let people know where they can find you. What websites do you have? What social media platforms, if any, that you use? And let's just make sure that people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. I own Sin's Play Place. It's a daycare and a childcare service. Kind of a 2-for-1 type of deal, man. There's, a lot of talks about childcare being unreliable and parents not being able to find something that works for their schedule. So my business offers a daycare in Stone Mountain, Georgia, right off of Memorial Drive, and also babysitters and nannies that come to your home. For those of you parents that are looking for reliable babysitters and childcare in your home, we do that too. You can find more information on my website. That's www.sinsplayplace.com. So that's CYNS playplace.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, Sin's Play Place LLC. Or if you're just looking to connect with me directly, I have a personal Facebook page. It's Nrgy, CYNMARIE.
Awesome. Fantastic. You guys make sure that you go support my girl. Make sure you go support my sis. For anyone who is in the Stone Mountain, Georgia, the Metro Atlanta area, and you need childcare services, or you know someone who can benefit from childcare services, make sure you hit her up. She is award-winning, if I may say so myself. But I do want to say thank you so much for joining in. Thank you for taking the time out to be a guest on this podcast. Yes, ma'am. So you guys, that's all for this episode. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support. If you would like to be a guest yourself, please contact me. You can find me on all of the social media channels such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and iTunes, or any of your other podcast platforms, whichever ones that you prefer to listen on. You can find me on any of those stations at Coach Nrgy. That is Coach Nrgy. And of course, you can always visit me and contact me through my website, which is CoachNrgy.com. That's CoachNrgy.com. Do not forget to subscribe, share, follow, hit the thumbs up button. Go ahead and let us know how much you like this particular episode, and put your comments below. Go ahead and get the conversation started. You know that's how we do it here. So one last thing, as always, do not forget, keep smiling.